Here's one I didn't see coming. Weed is being not quite legalized, but definitely taken to a different status when it comes to its criminal status. And it's a really big deal. It's not something I would have expected from this administration, and yet here we are. It's Friday, December 19th. I'm Jake Ward. This is the Rip Current. We look at the big invisible forces moving us here and there. And weed's something study that I have covered as a reporter for a long, long time. The policy around it, the science around it. It's pretty fascinating, and it's been really held back by the status of marijuana for as long as it has. And so this weird move, and I'll talk about the political implications of this in a moment, but the scientific implications of this weird move by the Trump administration could really be a very positive thing for this country. Let's get into it. So on Thursday, late in the day, the Trump administration announced that that Trump is signing an executive order that would ease the restrictions on marijuana. Now, the New York Times is reporting here that the move does not decriminalize marijuana. It, however, authorizes a pilot program to reimburse Medicare patients for products made with CBD, which is part of the, it's the anti-inflammatory part of marijuana. But here's the really big part. And so that may be part of the political answer here that we can talk about in a second. But the big thing is that it moves this drug from Schedule 1, which is the category of drug that includes heroin, the stuff that really kills people and around which there's tremendous violence, down to what's called Schedule 3. And that includes things like ketamine and I believe psilocybin, the stuff that's in mushrooms, hallucinatory mushrooms. Right. And these are things that have real, proven therapeutic benefit. There are all kinds of, uses of mushrooms and MDMA, the stuff in ecstasy, and ketamine that have been used for therapy. And it's been a very positive thing for a lot of people. So the thing that is, the reason that has been such a problem it's been a problem for a lot of reasons. One of the big ones is that it has really stifled research for years and years and years and years. It was impossible to study the weed that people were getting off the street or even out of legal dispensaries in the states. If you're a federal researcher and if you're a researcher who takes federal funds, and any reputable researcher who wants to do a big scale study of anything, more or less has to take National Science Foundation funding, National Institutes of Health funding, one of those. But if you're doing that, you have to comply with federal law. It doesn't matter that you're in a state where weed is legal. You are not allowed to go and get weed from that dispensary in California, even if you're a California-based researcher. Instead, you have to go to this one weed farm that the federal government has authorized in, I believe, Mississippi. Weird. I talked to the very nice guy who runs it a few times, and he's not who you would think would be running that place. The most important marijuana grow in the country. But the thing, now he was very proud of the product that he made. And it's weird to talk to a researcher about the quality of his weed, but I did. But the researchers that had to come to him for special dispensation to get this special weed and get these special pre-rolls, literally from this, weed grow, they said that the product wasn't good enough. It just wasn't strong enough. It didn't compare. You couldn't get the shatter and the wax and the other weird products. You couldn't get this stuff. So you couldn't do a one-to-one comparison of what is it like when people smoke this stuff that they're getting in huge numbers from these legal dispensaries. And as a result, the commercialization of marijuana was way out in front of our scientific understanding of what it does to a population on a large scale. And so you couldn't get into these large-scale questions like, for instance, I have family members for whom marijuana produces an enormous psychoactive effect way beyond what's healthy and drives them in some cases into a really seriously, an otherworldly experience that is not good. And that turns out to be a very common thing, not hugely common, but statistically significant. A lot of people have that kind of experience. Also, some people experience enormous GI discomfort and huge amounts of sort of nerve-based pain in their digestive tracts. There's all kinds of stuff like that we just haven't been able to study. Now, we know that there's a cluster of these sorts of symptoms around marijuana. What is not clustered in marijuana is violence, right? So when you look at the numbers on violence, it is clustered around the heroin trade and death in general. Heroin, right, produces enormous amounts of both violence and death. Alcohol produces those things. Until Prohibition, the number one cause of death in men in the United States, young men, was cirrhosis of the liver, drinking so much that you killed yourself, that you destroyed your liver and died. It still produces incredible amounts of death in this country. And, as anyone who's been to a little too long at a bar, too late at a bar will tell you, right? Fights break out and all that kind of stuff. People on marijuana, they don't fight. They don't crash their car. They do if they mix the marijuana with alcohol. You should never do those two things and drive. You shouldn't drive intoxicated in any way, but it is, it's drunk driving that takes all the lives in this country. So the logic that somehow this belonged in Schedule 1 because it was violent, that it was connected to death and violence is silly. And that's part of what is silly about the response that people have traditionally had in conservative circles to the idea of legalizing marijuana. So quoted in the New York Times article is a letter from 18 GOP senators and 26 House Republicans writing to oppose the reclassification. Now that is really, right? These are not people who tend to buck the president. So they feel very strongly about this. And a big conservative nonprofit, Catholic Vote, has also lobbied the president against the change, according to the Times. So, quote, here's what they say in the letter. Quote, in light of the documented dangers of marijuana, facilitating the growth of the marijuana industry is at odds with growing our economy and encouraging healthy lifestyles for Americans. We urge you to continue your strong leadership of our country and our economy and to turn away from marijuana rescheduling. So the documented dangers, no. The danger that I assume they are talking about has to do with the crime that we have seen around it. And that is in part because in the same way that a researcher can't take federal funding, a bank that enjoys the FDIC insurance, right? The federal deposit insurance, that means that a run on the bank is impossible and that the government will make you whole if a bank goes belly up. It's the basis of why we believe in banks in the United States, why they're the envy of the world in terms of reliability. If you want to hang on to that insurance that makes your bank possible, you can't do any business with anyone even remotely connected to the marijuana industry in the United States. And again, it doesn't matter if your state has legalized it. So I have a friend who's a banker, and he told me the story of sitting across from a very nice young woman from a security camera company. She was applying for a loan, business loan. She's going through her materials, showing him her P&L and so forth, this and the other. And he's looking through it, and he looks at one thing and he says, "Oh, what's this client?" And she says, "Oh, that's a marijuana dispensary." And he said that he had to follow his training. He had to close the book, hand it back to her, shake her hand, say, "It was great meeting you. I'm afraid I cannot continue this meeting." And that's it. Meeting's over, because he can't even talk to someone who is even secondarily connected to the marijuana industry. She's not in the business, but she's accepting money from the companies that do the business. And so that's it. He's got to be done. So as a result, because these companies, not even a secondary company can do business with a bank, it means that the dispensaries themselves have, of course, not been able to use a bank. So they can't do cash deposits into a bank. They got to hang on to the cash themselves. They also have had huge trouble dealing with trying to get the SWIFT systems that make using credit card machines possible. Also been really hard. They've figured out some workarounds, but it's really hard. And so they're a mostly cash business, and they got to mostly keep that cash. They can't put it into a bank. And as a result, that's why, like here in California where I am, our local dispensary has been knocked over multiple times. People drive a car through the front of it and run in with guns because they know that place is full of cash. So there has been crime around this stuff, but that's because of the FDIC problem. This is why Gavin Newsom, governor of California, has proposed in the past some sort of agricultural bank model, a sort of state-guaranteed bank that doesn't have FDIC insurance, but state-guaranteed insurance for the marijuana industry to try and avoid this problem, because he recognizes that that is a huge issue. So all of this is just to say, like the policy around this stuff has not been based in science, really. And so it's very interesting to see the president talk about this. This is not a guy that I'm used to seeing a lot of sort of scientifically backed policy. And yet here he is saying that a lot of people want to see the reclassification because it leads to tremendous amounts of research that can't be done unless you reclassify. So we are looking at that very strongly. He said that earlier this week on Monday before signing this thing on Thursday. This is not a guy I think about. Now, I have to assume, so the politics of this, I have to assume, have to do with all the people who would be reimbursed by Medicare, that huge numbers of his voting base, because huge numbers of Americans in general are smoking marijuana. And I would just argue it does, in spite of the health dangers it poses to a chunk of people who use it, for the most part, it's an incredibly healthy alternative to other forms of intoxicants. As a former drinker, I'll say, California sober treats me much better than drinking ever did. And I've listened to professional athlete after professional athlete complain that they wish that marijuana were legalized so that they could not have to be surreptitious about that. And if you look back at the old days of like the old NBA, those guys are drinking and drinking and drinking. And they all talk about like, it was bad for my body, it was bad for my sleep, bad for my hydration. I should have been using this, much more natural substance and making it happen that way. I just think, we have for a long time, for racist reasons, for backwards reasons, we've had this thing misclassified as something that it is not. And what I really would like to see now is good research come out of this. I want people to be able to do the real research. And one of the really important things, last note I'll just say here, is now it's up to the states that have legalized this and are making enormous amounts of revenue out of this to fund that research. Now there's no excuse. They had the excuse of the federal classification before. Now they should be funding this research, and let's get it done. Let's figure out what this stuff is really about. What's a safe amount to use? What are the predictors of the sorts of for the small numbers of people who do have psychoactive, excessive psychological experiences or nerve trouble or any of that stuff. So let's get serious now. I don't know why. I'm sure it's just for politically expedient reasons, but for some reason we're suddenly, making the right choice, a scientifically based choice around the policies here. And so now let's get the science where it needs to go. And that has to do with making sure this stuff is safe and well understood. The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.